So, Professor Schabas, we have all the guest speakers with us now. As you can see, there is Professor Lu Zhian from Fudan University. He's the chair of Human Rights
Hello,
Center.
Professor Schabas. Good to see you again.
Nice to see you again.
Yeah, okay. And then there's Dr. Tian on the screen as well, the one with a tie, even more formally dressed than I am.
And I'm very informally dressed.
Hi. Nice to meet you.
Hello, how do you do?
Yeah, Dr. Tian is a PhD from Wuhan University, one of the best international law universities in China. And he also runs the Global Governance Institution in Beijing, an independent think tank on international law. They will be with us today. And we today only limit the participants to less than 100. So we are recording this for the education purpose of the Moot Court student in the future. Today, as you know, we organize this lecture or a conversation with you because we every year organize the International Criminal Court, Moot Court. This year, we have 72 universities participating. 45 of them competed 2 weeks ago. And Professor Lu and Dr. Tian were all involved in the Moot Court competition, either as judge or as coach. And in the audience, we also have some of the Moot Court students, as well as coaches and judges with us today. It's really unfortunate that we have to do this Moot Court still online, still a virtual format. Usually in July, we take all the students to The Hague for the final week of the Moot Court, including a visit to Leiden University. But this year, we cannot take them to The Hague. So we invited you to give us a conversation or a lecture online now for an hour or so. So without further ado, I will now first put some questions to you in order to start this conversation going. And afterwards, I will invite Dr. Tian and Professor Lu to give some remarks and follow-up questions with them, with what they have from the half an hour collections. And first question to you, Professor Schabas, do you know now you have a Chinese name?
Oh, really? Well, I've often spoken in China and I've had Chinese names put in front of me, but I don't know what it is.
No, we in preparing this conversation, I realized everyone refer you as teacher Sha. So Sha stands for Schabas, and everyone call you as Sha Lao Shi. I think everyone sort of knows you very well through your publications or through your previous works in China. So here comes my first question. We're living in a world where international law is the most difficult to find a job. But you are a professor, at least as far as I know, you are a professor in UK and also a professor here in London, and you are a peer on behalf of the countries in front of the International Criminal Court and also involved in the work of ICC and other tribunals. So the first question is, how do you manage all this? Any tricks, tips you can give to us?
Well, I never really thought about it very much. I think of myself mainly as a writer, actually.
Oh, really?
The main things I do in my life professionally, and I think where I make the biggest contribution is in writing. And the other part, although I don't want to take too much credit for it, but it's been an important part of my work, is supervising doctoral students, research students, and particularly PhD students. And I've had now 60 or more students completed PhDs under my supervision. Many of them are now academics at various stages in their career around the world, including China. I think I have 4 now former doctoral students who are now academics in China. So I look upon that as important as well. The lawyering part, the litigation, which I've done at the European Court of Human Rights, at the International Court of Justice, as you know, and I enjoy doing it because I used to be a courtroom lawyer. Before I was an academic, I was a practicing lawyer. And also because I managed to do this in things that are very directly relevant to my own academic interests. So for example, in the last in the last 7 or 8 years, there have been 3 major genocide cases, 2 of them at the International Court of Justice and 1 at the European Court. And I've been a lawyer in all of those cases. So that's important. But it's not a big part of my time. It doesn't consume a lot of my time. You know, about the writing, I have a little saying, a motto that comes, I think, originally from a Latin expression, is to write every day. Say that you should write something every day. And I tell this to my students. I say, if you write a little bit every day, you end up writing a lot. And some of them follow my advice and some of them don't, you know. But I think that, to me, this is the secret to producing a lot of material, of writing a lot, is to have it constantly in your mind. And it's there if you're thinking about, if you're writing every day. So I'm working on a book now. I produced 2 books last year during the lockdown because I had nothing else to do. I wrote books. I wrote 2 books, and I'm in the middle of a 3rd book. Now I can leave my apartment and I can go to the swimming pool. So every morning I go swimming. And when I'm swimming, I do laps. I go back and forth, and I think about the book because I think about it's on my mind. But that's because every day I'm working on the book. And so this is my advice beyond that. The other thing is, you know, we're in a field, academic life, international law, lawyering, where you have a lot of things going on at the same time. Yeah. And you have to organize your time in order to do that. Everybody has different ways of organizing their time. But I think the key thing to organizing your time is finding a way of doing the things you don't like doing. Because otherwise you just do the things you like doing. And you have to have some system to force yourself to do the things you don't like doing as well. And then you get everything done.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Professor Schabas. And one of your students, Dr. Tian Shichen, who is now in Suzhou University, she wants to join us today, but she has some personal occupations at this moment, so she cannot join us.
She's back in China.
She's already back in China, and she's now teaching in Suzhou University.
Well, then that means I have 5 doctoral students in China now.
Okay, she wasn't one of them. Yeah, she's with this new school. I think it's called Red Cross School, something in the Suzhou University. Excellent. They're very active in the ground. Just to follow up a little bit on your works, you divide your work, part of them as writing and supervising the PhD students, and part of them is also not taking that much of your time is practicing lawyer, appearing in front of the International Court of Justice and the European Court of Human Rights, these international tribunals. So I think a lot of the students, after they do moot courts, they face a choice. They either do litigation, become a lawyer, most of them commercial arbitration or commercial lawyers in general, or they choose to be academic. Rarely we find people can combine these 2 things together. Do you have any advice when young students who are now facing this career choice at this juncture of their life? Which one should they pursue, or is there a way of reconcile these 2 different tracks of a career?
There are different ways, of course, of doing this, and there are many people who go to practice international law through working for law firms that do international law. So I would think that there's a market for Chinese-speaking lawyers with the big international law firms, who are mainly outside of China, of course, in places like London and Paris and New York and so on. So I would think there's a market there for, I don't say Chinese, I say for people who are fluent in Chinese, because that's one of the things that they will require. You know, the limitation there, of course, is that ultimately most international law at the international tribunals is going on in English and to a lesser extent in French.
Yeah.
So the Chinese language is really more for just being familiar, being able to read and work with Chinese language materials. In my case, I didn't try to practice international law at the courts. I developed a profile as an academic, and then countries would call me, law firms and countries would contact me. So I've never gone looking for work. I just wait to be called, and it took many years. For many years, nobody called. Nobody. And I wasn't unhappy about that because I wasn't expecting anybody to call. And then one day, a government called me and said, you know, we're having this difficult case at the International Court of Justice. You wrote a book about genocide, and we need your expertise. So that's a little bit how I got into it. The other way, of course, but I think that that's probably not, it appeared to me when I was a law student that if you wanted to do international law, the only way to do it was to go into the foreign service and work for the government.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yet, the people I knew who did that, many of them never did international law. They became foreign service, they worked for the government, they became foreign service officers, and they ended up being issuing visas in Melbourne or something like this. You know, they never got to the International Court of Justice. So it wasn't such a great route. But at the time, I think, to me, that was the only way you could do international law. Otherwise, it was just a hobby. It was something you did at university. I did a moot court, like the rest of you. I did the Jessup moot court in 1983.
Wow.
In Canada.
A year before I was born.
Yeah, well, I didn't think you were that old. Okay. And but I didn't have any ambition to do international law as a practitioner. But then, and when I became a university lecturer, I lectured in ordinary criminal law, domestic criminal law, and family law. I didn't do international law because there were only a few courses and they were taken. But over time, I managed to become more recognized in international law. And then, as I say, governments and law firms would phone me and ask me to help them do some work.
Thank you very much, Professor Schabas. And I think that will help a lot of students to make up their career paths after this lecture. We all know you as the genocide guru, not, that's a difficult description. We should say you are a guru on genocide studies, knows from your work. I think students frequently cite your work on genocide and also other international law publications as well. So any reason you choose genocide at the beginning? What tricks you into this field? What made a determination that I want to be, you know, the expert on genocide, just out of curiosity?
Well, there's a story to tell you. It's a good question for me. After I finished my PhD, which was on the death penalty in international law, and the book I wrote, my thesis, is in Chinese. It's translated in Chinese. I don't know if anybody looks at it anymore, but it was translated into Chinese some years ago. So when I finished my doctoral thesis about now 30 years ago, I was somehow became known to NGOs, non-governmental organizations in Canada, where I lived, as being a specialist in human rights law generally. And one of them was recruiting a couple of experts to join a fact-finding mission, a human rights fact-finding mission to Rwanda. So this was in late 1992, 29 years ago. And so I agreed to go. I had never been to Africa before. This was I had never done a human rights fact-finding mission either. I was going as someone with a PhD who knew about human rights law. And we were in Rwanda about 15 months before the genocide began. But already we were talking about how Rwanda genocide seemed to be getting prepared. We sensed it. And people turned to me in the mission. There were 10 of us, human rights activists and specialists from different countries. And they turned to me and said, well, you're the expert in international law. What's genocide? I didn't know. In those days, now 29, 30 years ago, we would a human rights specialist would travel always with a little book of human rights treaties. We didn't have internet. We didn't have Google. We had these little books and they had all the human rights treaties. And I looked up the Genocide Convention and read the definition. And then I told them what I thought it meant. So this is an amateur at work, not a professional. As you know, only an amateur would read a treaty and say, I think this is what it means. The professional has to know the case law, the jurisprudence, the academic writing. I didn't know any of that. To be honest, 30 years ago, we hardly studied genocide. It wasn't an issue of interest to international lawyers. So I said, yeah, we could use it. It made sense. And we used it. And then the bosses of these NGOs came to me and said, you're an idiot. You don't know what you're talking about genocide. And to be honest, I didn't. And so I felt humiliated. And I said, well, this won't happen to me again. And I went to the library to get the books on genocide, on the Genocide Convention, to read them. And I discovered that nobody had written anything, no lawyer had written a book or even a significant article in a journal about the Genocide Convention since the 1950s.
Wow.
And so I said, well, I'm going to do that. That's all. So I kind of stumbled. I fell into this field. I didn't plan to do it. And I had done my doctorate on the death penalty. I didn't have any great interest in the subject of genocide, but it was that sense of, part of it was the embarrassment about not knowing anything about it. But then the other thing, which is something that all research students, doctoral students, master's students, international lawyers are always doing, is looking for a hole in the literature, a gap that they can research and fill. So that's what I did. That's how it happened.
That's a very inspiring story, Professor. I'm very glad this NGO has somehow shaped your career. Now we have a genocide study expert in the world because of their previous works. We Chinese Initiative on International Law is also one of those NGOs, and we are very proud to organize conversation like this. Hopefully, some of the attendees of this lecture or conversation, after realizing how much potential experience like this can help you to shape your careers, and you can also think about your career or what to do with your studies in the future. Professor, now I also want to come in a little bit deeper on the two issues you have just cited. One of them is on death penalty, and one of them is on genocide. The first on death penalty, maybe we go chronically, the areas that you started with in your research when you were doing your PhD. The background is that we also know that you worked on death penalty in China before. So how did you get involved there, and what's your take of that work? We realize that you haven't come to China for a while now, but I feel that this is a connection you have with international law circles here with your previous works on death penalty.
Yes, I started visiting China in around the year 2001. And for years, I was an EU fund project that enabled me to go to China 2 or 3 times a year. And then I was also invited as a visiting lecturer at different universities in China. And you're correct. I haven't had the last time I was there was 3 years ago, I think. And I went to Guangzhou and to Zhen. I was in the south for where I have some of my former students, and I gave some lectures. So I miss going to China, and I just haven't had the occasion to go there in the last few years. But there's no reluctance to go. Obviously, the pandemic has made it impractical, but that will change, we guess. And often I was there for lectures or seminars relating to capital punishment. You know, what I watched over the years from about 2000 to maybe 5 or 6 years ago was changing attitudes within China among academics and among lawyers to the issue of capital punishment. But I don't have any knowledge or sense of any more recent developments. And as you know, I don't know, probably none of you know what the rate of execution is in China, how many people are executed. It's a secret. And we have criticized that because it doesn't make sense that it's a secret. The rationale, the justification for having capital punishment is deterrence. So how can you deter people if they don't know what's happening? You have to. It's illogical. But this has been China's policy, and I think the general view is that China is still the country that conducts the most executions in the world. What we see elsewhere in the world is that every year, 1 or 2 countries abolish the death penalty. So now I did the report for the United Nations last year. They do every 5 years. And that's the last 3 reports, 2010, 2015, and 2020. And what we see is this gradual increase in the number of countries that have abolished the death penalty, but also a very general decline in the use of it by countries that have the death penalty. So this year, according to the reports of Amnesty International, the use of the death penalty is the lowest it's ever been in history. Oh, so there are two things we can look at. One is the number of states that have stopped using the death penalty, which continues to increase. Also, the number of executions in the state that. So I would assume China follows the same pattern. I would think that it's probably the case in China, but we have no information. So we can see in other countries, you know, we also measure the number of executions by the size in the population. So it's normal that China would have the largest number of executions because it has the most people. So we can't compare. It's not fair to look at the number of executions and compare it with Iran or Saudi Arabia because the populations there are much smaller. But what we can rate by the population and so mark because we just don't know the numbers. But in Iran, there's been a very dramatic decline in the use of the death penalty in the last 3 or 4 years. So it's declining everywhere, even in the United States. So in the United States, we watched this gradual decline. You know, in the United States, every state has a different rules. Plus, you have a death penalty at the federal level, at the central level. So last year, the 50 states conducting the executions, it was the lowest. There were, I think, 8 executions, and there had been 20 the previous year and 25 the year before that. But the number went up in the US because the madman who was the president, Donald Trump, decided in the last 6 months to execute people. And so he executed a lot of people. I think maybe 20. It looks more dramatic, but Biden will never execute anybody. That's finished in the US, President Biden. So in the US, a big decline as well. And I mean, China, you're like everywhere else in the world. So why wouldn't you be that way on the death penalty too? You know, but we don't know.
Thank you, Professor Schabas. When you say like 3 years ago, that was your last visit, I'm pretty sure that Professor Lu and Dr. Tian would love to host you in the future after the pandemic in Beijing and Shanghai for a visit in the future. Both of them has indicated some intention to have you with us, not only virtually, but physically with us in China in the future.
Sure.
Yeah, so
I look
now
forward
moving
to it. Yeah.
Oh, thank you very much. Moving on from death penalty now to the second area of your expertise on genocide. This year, finally, a Biden administration confirmed that they would label what happened in Armenia as genocide. So this is a very big step forward for many advocates. Also, those both for the Armenian NGOs, Armenian state, and Armenian diaspora. But there are also other situations where we don't have this much attention on it. But there are also, like we don't have this much attention on the atrocities that has been committed, be it everywhere in the world, that somewhere in the developed world, somewhere in the African continent, or in the Middle East. There's a lot of discussions, let's say, on the politics of genocide. What's your view on that? Especially now we're in the area that there's multiple accusations of genocide happening in the world from different sources. Do you have any comments?
I was very pleased to see the US, to see President Biden acknowledge and recognize the genocide of the Armenians in 1915. The reason why the US has not done it in the past has nothing to do with the truth or history or reality. It's simply they didn't want to get Turkey angry. It's all about foreign relations with Turkey. And in the explanations for the change of position in the US, the explanations emphasize the fact that the relations between the US and Turkey are not good right now. So this is a cynical, hypocritical move. I welcome it in a way, because I think it's finally they have done it. But I realize that for the United States government, the term genocide is a term to be used politically, and it's clear that this is what they're doing with respect to China, in my view. So, you know, it was they had condemned China for genocide before they condemned Turkey for genocide. And I was saying to people, the only difference between the genocide in China and genocide in Turkey is that 1.5 million people were murdered in Turkey in 1915. And from what I can determine, there are no murders that have taken place in Xinjiang, in Xinjiang, rather. So this is politics. This is American politics, and it's no mystery. The man who first made the declaration was Pompeo, Trump's Secretary of State. He did it on his last day in office, but you know, the change in government of the United States, the foreign policy hasn't changed that much. It's more polite. Biden is better behaved than Trump. That's not hard. But the policy is similar. And recently, and so I know because you wrote me, you've seen the little article I wrote
Yes.
with Jeff Sachs that was published on the internet. And there we were criticizing, we were looking for an angle, a way to address the issue of the claims that the accusations of genocide in China. And so we built our argument around the Department of State annual reports. So every year, the US Department of State issues an annual report about human rights around the world. And they have chapters on many countries, not every country, but I think on most countries, they have a chapter. Yeah. And China, as you will not be surprised, they have a big chapter on China.
Yeah.
And they find a lot of human rights violations, with issues about freedom of expression and free and fair elections. There's a range of issues that they address. Can you get it in China on the internet? You can probably find it. Anyway, it has what we call an executive summary, which you often see in documents where you have 2 or 3 pages. It's for the lazy people who don't want to read the report. They put an executive summary and it gives you the highlights, and then you can find the explanation in the whole report. And so in the executive summary, they say that genocide is being committed against the Uyghur in China. But then when you read the rest of the report, there's nothing there that explains the argument about genocide. So it's a very, very weak case. And this is really the point of our argument, that they don't make the evidence, they don't produce the evidence, and they don't demonstrate that genocide is being committed. I've never been to Xinjiang. I don't know the situation personally there. But I can read the reports from people who do write about it. So I read the US Department of State report with my question is, what's the evidence of genocide? They don't have it. I haven't been there. I haven't done investigations. All I can do is read the reports of people who claim it is genocide. And they're pathetic. So one of the other reports on that built the argument, we didn't discuss this in our article, Jeff Sachs and I, but it's one of the other main legal report came from London, from a law office of very distinguished lawyers in London. They did it at the request of Uyghur NGOs, Uyghur activists, recruited them to do it. So they produced a report, which I have, and I've read and studied. And they don't make the case for genocide. They talk about violations, about the detention, about the restrictions on births. But then they say, which is entirely correct legally, they say these are only evidence of genocide if they were committed with the intent to physically destroy the group. And then they say there's a plausible argument that they had this intent. Well, the term plausible argument, this is not enough to condemn anybody. If you went to a court in where courts I'm familiar with, and you said to the judge, if the prosecutor said, "Judge, there's a plausible argument that this man has a guilty intent," the judge would say, "Get out of my court. We don't convict people because there's a plausible argument. We convict them only when there's clear and convincing evidence that they have this intent." So the barrister's report, the lawyer's report in London, I think it doesn't make the case either. There's only one report that actually is more complete, but it comes from a very suspicious. So the Department of State, I know who that is. The lawyers in London, I know them too. But the third report comes from something called the New Lines Institute. And I did some research about New Lines Institute. It made headlines around the world, including in London, and they described it as a non-partisan think tank. So a non-partisan think tank, that could be anybody. There's in Britain, elsewhere in the world, that are very credible. They've been in existence for many years. We know the people who work there. Not the New Lines Institute. The New Lines Institute was created a year and a half ago, and it's said to be an institute of a university in the United States that has 150 students and 8 faculty members. You know, smells to me like this is a CIA front. You know, it's not a credible institution. So, you know, that doesn't mean that they're wrong, but I don't find it reliable. I mean, I always say, you know, even, you know, the saying that even a broken clock tells the right time twice a day. So even if your clock is broken or the battery is run out, twice a day, it will tell you the correct time. So you can have a very, very dubious organization and they might be, but I don't trust their sources of evidence. And they in detention were forced to eat pork. So, you know, if you're a Muslim and you can't eat pork, it's not very nice to force someone to eat pork, although I don't know how they do that. Do they hold their mouths open? And, you know, it's a report, maybe there was one case of it or something. We don't know where it came from. They don't have sources at all. And I'm, of course, very suspicious of the accusations. In Britain, the British Parliament recognized officially, the members of Parliament recognized genocide of the Uyghurs. They haven't recognized the genocide of the Armenians. It's politics.
Wow. Well, thank you, Professor Schabas. That was
politics.
Okay. Sorry, there was some. Yeah, okay, the signal is back on. Well, thank you, Professor Schabas. That was actually the last question coming from my side. I do want to leave some time for the 2 speakers we have from China, Dr. Tian and yes, Professor Lu, for their questions and comment at this moment. After now, may I maybe invite Dr. Tian first? He's on my right of the screen. You're still muted, I think. Can you? Yeah, can you unmute? Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael, for your kind words and introduction. It's a great conversation between you and Professor William Schabas, and we really learned a lot. And I should say, on behalf of Chinese international law scholars, that we are really lucky and greatly honored to have you with us, Professor Schabas, today, because I don't think we can find a more suitable professor to discuss this issue than the professor of international law, who wrote a book entitled Genocide in International Law, The Crime of Crime. So I think we could give more publicity to your talk so that more international law scholars can benefit and understand the true meaning of this crime of crimes. So I would also like to share some of my own opinion on this issue. In particular, taking the alleged genocide in Xinjiang, for example. And I may also touch upon the article you mentioned, co-authored with Professor Jeffrey Sachs. As international law scholars, we all know the influence of Polish lawyer Raphael Lemkin. When Professor Raphael Lemkin coined the word genocide and successfully persuaded it into an international crime sanctioned by a special treaty, he would have thought that this legal term would turn into an old antique left over from history. In his time, it was only in 1945 that the Nazi Germany war criminals were indicted among other things, on the charge of genocide. It was the realities of European life in the years between 1933 and 1945 that called for the creation of such a term and for the formulation of such a legal concept of destruction of human groups. When this obsolete legal term is rejuvenated, either as confirmed in Yugoslavia or in Rwanda, or allegedly accused in Burma and in Xinjiang in China, what would Lamkin like to comment if he was still alive? If the expansion of the application of this crime, what he really wants, does the abuse of this crime of crimes really serve the purpose of creating it in international law? Let me turn into Xinjiang. As a frequent traveler to Xinjiang, I was shocked to know a Xinjiang in the Western reports, which is totally different from the one which I saw through my personal experiences and with my own eyes. I think I spent my 2018 Spring Festival in Xinjiang as a tourist and made many business trips to Xinjiang when I was still an active service military officer. But how could a place as a popular tourism destination become a place of genocides, which used to be related to memory of Holocaust in World War II? With the growing of Uyghur population faster than the non-Uyghur population, how could the criminal intent to destroy permanently a human group be established by those either UK or US lawyers? Although the US-China strategic competition is a reality, and both Trump and Biden administration has taken the whole of government approach to contain China, are the scientific, technological, military, and ideological measures they have taken not enough so that they have to disturb Lamkin's resting soul to use the outdated weapon of genocide? And I think the United States, still the United States, who saved lives of victims of genocide from Nazi Germans? Is the United States still the United States who helped Lamkin criminalize genocide in international law? And is the United States still the United States who championed the establishment of the UN and adoption of the Human Rights Declaration? Is the desire to maintain global hegemony so strong and necessary that a jus cogens norm of international law, recognized as such by the whole international community, can be ignored or abused? So, given the racial discrimination in the US, also in Australia, given the loss of thousands of civilian lives in Syria, in Libya, in Iraq, also the unilateral use of force by the US without any legal basis in the international law in 2003, who should be accountable for the loss of both civilian and military lives in the Iraq war? Do the Iraqi lives matter? Do the Afghanistan lives matter? Do the Syrian lives matter? Or only the US lives or white lives matter? So finally, please also allow me to frankly share my dissenting opinion with Professor Schabas on the human rights conditions in Xinjiang. I noticed that you echoed in the article the Xinjiang genocide allegations are unjustified, that UN experts are rightly calling for the UN to investigate the situation in Xinjiang. I do not disagree with an UN-led investigation as long as it is based on exchange and cooperation, not on guilty before proven. But my question is, why only targeting China? Do the human rights abuses in US also qualify for an UN-led investigation in terms of its massive racism and white supremacism? And how about Australia in terms of its Afghanistan war crimes? And if all those human rights abuses qualify for an UN-led investigation, why only targeting China? So this is my question. In conclusion, human rights is a process instead of a fixed status quo. Yes, there are human rights problems in Xinjiang, as with any part of the world, which is forever not perfect and needs to be improved constantly. However, when it comes to China, the Western scrutiny of human rights conditions has always been through a horizontal approach versus a vertical approach. At the end of the day, what is intentionally neglected is the huge human rights progress in this history of mankind, not to see the poverty eradication of hundreds of millions of Chinese people. Just take myself, for example. When I was born in a rural village, the house where my family lived is made of mud and straws. The only electronic thing in my home is a torch. So you could imagine how living standards has improved after reform and opening up. I think we Chinese people only want to live a happy and peaceful life, just as the American people does, as the British people, as any other people in the world does. Ironically, as a country with a traditionally strong army, which used to confront the US in the Korean War, China signed land border demarcation agreements with 12 of its 14 neighbors, all through peaceful talks, instead of taking advantage of its strong army. Equally ironically, while not a traditionally maritime power because it's a weak navy, China is accused of taking assertive action in both East and South China Sea, despite of the fact that it is the US warships that traveled thousands of miles away to the door of China. So from the perspective of an average Chinese, what I would like to say is that the accusation of genocide in Xinjiang is just a continuation of another disinformation campaign against China and is totally politicized. Finally, there have been debates about facts and law regarding alleged genocide in Xinjiang.
Dr. Tian, can I remind you of the time a little bit? We only blocked 1 hour with Professor Schabas. If you can, if I ask you about a little bit of your comments at this
only
point.
Only one last invitation. Only one last invitation. Professor, you said you have not been there to Xinjiang. Are you willing to accept an invitation from our think tank to visit Xinjiang in person? I think I can do that. Thank you. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Me respond, or should I?
Right, Professor Schabas, I think you can answer this question, or
I'm not sure what to do.
Reply to his Dr. Tian's comments first, and we can move on to Professor Lu afterwards.
Okay. I have a little more time. We don't have to stop in 5 minutes or anything. So
that's a huge relief on my side. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I mean, I hope Dr. Tian understands that we agree on 98% of everything he said, I think. And I have often have seen myself as an international lawyer with a specialist in human rights and genocide issues as fighting the double standards that are present in the global order. And to that extent, we're on exactly the same wavelength, I think, on these issues. One of the arguments I made, you'll understand, I hope, that the article I did with Jeff Sachs, who's a very distinguished professor in the United States, and the fact that it was published by this website, it involved compromise. And my original draft was a little more aggressive, shall we say. In particular, I had to put in a line in there where I spoke about the allegations about detentions, because the Western media, one of the main allegations against China is they say they have 1 million Uyghur in detention. Now, having members of an ethnic group in detention in that way is not an act of genocide anyway. But this is the allegation they make. So I put a line in their thing saying that there's only one other country in the world where we know that there are 1 million members of an ethnic minority in detention. And that's, of course, the United States of America. You know, you mentioned Raphael Lemkin, the man who developed the word. He was, of course, he was not American. He was a Jewish refugee from Eastern Europe. He came from a town that was only 20 kilometers from the towns where my grandparents were born, in what is now Ukraine. And Lemkin came to the United States as a refugee, great relationship with the US government. And he didn't have a great deal of support from the US government. His proposal of genocide, and I explain this in my book, was a reaction to the narrow approach to crimes against humanity proposed by the Americans for the Nuremberg trial, because they wanted to make sure that crimes against humanity would not apply to the persecution of Black people in the United States. And they were haunted by this. In the early years of the United Nations, the way the Americans compromised was to have of genocide. That's for sure. They have a broad definition of genocide for China and a narrow definition when it's their friends. And this is just the way the United States is weaponizing it. The whole world could see as well. You mentioned about the Navy. It wasn't about China, but it would work with China as well. There was a wonderful cartoon somewhere, I think I forget where, and it showed a map of Russia, and the caption said, "This shows how aggressive the Russians are. They built out their country near all of our bases." And they showed all the American bases that surround Russia. How, they should have their Navy in their own territorial waters and keep it there, as far as I'm concerned. I've been campaigning, amongst other things, for the International Criminal Court to be much more engaged with dealing with allegations against the United States. And of course, against its great ally, Israel, as well, who are both being investigated by the court because of a certain amount of courage by the prosecutor. The International Criminal Court is an institution that, while it's not immune to the politics, the global politics. Is the extent that you can create some degree of you can loosen the control by the United States and its allies. Sometimes you can have some interesting results. We put in the article, Jeff Sachs and I, this proposal about allowing fact-finding mission. Of course, it would only be on consent, and there was no intention to suggest, and I'm sure Jeff Sachs would agree with me, that there should not be fact-finding missions in the United States too. There have been some, and we totally agree that the U.S. should be held accountable. I gave a lecture recently where I pointed to Raphael Lemkin, these two nations in 1946. So I've been spending a lot of time in the last 2 or 3 months studying the United Nations in the early years, the first years of the United Nations, because I'm one of the things that fascinates me is how in the first year, the first session of the General Assembly of 1946, there were a number of anti-racist resolutions, and they didn't come from the United States for obvious reasons. They came from the countries of the South, of the global South. The best, most progressive human rights measures in nations in the first year came from the countries of the South. And this was an amazing, I didn't know this. It was a discovery for me. There were two resolutions on international criminal law. One on the Nuremberg principles, which came straight from the White House. This is Resolution 95, proposed by Truman. And it was to affirm the principles of Nuremberg. And of course, the Nuremberg were the Germans committed crimes against humanity, but the Americans didn't. The other resolution was the genocide resolution, and it was proposed by three countries from the South: India, Panama, and Cuba. That's where that was the source of that resolution. So I described these two. The genocide resolution was there so that it would apply to all countries in peacetime. And that meant it would apply to the United States as well as to other countries. So I call that resolution the Black Lives Matter resolution. And the other resolution on Nuremberg, I call it the Black Lives Don't Matter resolution. Okay. But this is fascinating. I'm writing a book now about racism and international law. And it will be out in maybe a year. And a whole discussion about what was going on in the UN conference. There was a resolution that came from an amendment to the Covenant of the League of Nations on racism that came from Japan. And it was blocked by Woodrow Wilson, the American president. A country that supported Japan was a neighbor of Japan's that wasn't in love with Japan, because Japan wanted to get Shantung from the Germans, and I'm talking about China. But the great Chinese diplomat, Wellington Koo, said, we're with Japan on this. We agree with Japan. We have to include the anti-racism resolution. And then Woodrow Wilson came. Woodrow Wilson was from the southern United States. He was a real southern racist from the US, and he just said no, veto. So now you've got me going. I can talk for hours about this. I'll stop, Michael.
Well, thank you, Professor Schabas. I was going to say that after you finish this book, we will all be very interested to translate it into Chinese. I'm sure we'd love to do that, even though we have 1 year to wait before we can read this book. Also, now I think it's a great time to transition now to Professor Lu, who is more on the human rights side, since we were just talking about the racist issues. I want to ask Professor Lu if you have any comments or questions at this moment to share with us.
Okay, thank you, Michael. So this morning I asked you, so should I do something for this conference? You say I just have a purist here. So,
any immediate reflections you have with us? No obligations.
Yeah. So thanks very much. I should say that I would like to extend my thanks to the Professor Schabas and for his very excellent just in the question answers, the presentations. So particularly, I think the first talking about the professional career. So I think just Professor William Schabas actually revealed his secret for how to be the international academic, the lawyers or international law academics. Yeah, so it's very important, I think. So of course, she said, so though she said he's only just the writer or the supervisor and the lawyer. So I think as a man who actually now who has just to make the great achievement in these three aspects. So this is the greatest man. So of course, he said write something. I think his proposal, advice for writing something every day, and also try to do something you don't like to do, and try to make you more complicated, not just to bias, just to pick up something selectively. So this is also, I think, is very inspiring. And then also, as academics, when you read the literatures, you also need to look into the holes or the gaps between them, and you will find something which is create yourself, just create something to fill in the gap and in academia. So this is also, I think, I believe this is actually definitely, so is a world for the young lawyers or the young law students to follow. And also it's, I think, inspiring to me. And particularly, I think when we say about just, of course, death penalty, so in China, so I think the Professor Schabas has visited China quite a lot and also involved just a lot of discussions in China's death penalties issues. So of course, I think he also know what is happens now, the changes in the procedure rules for the death penalties. So now all the death penalties should be the cases, so the person should be executed for the capital punishment should be approved, reviewed by the Supreme Court, the People's Court in China. So definitely, so I think this is one of the ways to try to restrict so the death penalties, the situation for the death penalty. Also, so far as I know, so this is also try to reduce the situations for the death penalty. So this is the policy I think have already just done quite for a long time. So as I'm not sure, because I am not just the expert, just to focus on, just to pay attention to the rates. So I'm not quite sure, but for me, so China is also quite now the prudent, just also careful to the exercise or just to impose the death penalties. So try to limit it in certain situations, in certain cases. So this is sort of a why, because now, so what is for the death penalty or what is against death penalty, both has its own reasons. So China also has its own reasons, I think so. So I'm not sure to do that. So that's what I say, okay, China is also try to, as Professor Schabas says, well, do something, try to limit or restrict the death penalties in the practice or even in the criminal policies. And the second, so I totally agree with Professor Schabas about, so for the genocide, now the genocide is politicalized by some countries, in particular Western countries. So they took the use, now they think maybe this is now is a easy, also is one of the useful weapons for them to attack some countries, including China or in other countries. So because they are trying to use it for pursuing its political interests. So when they try to categorize, so when they use these terms, normally they do not pay much more attention to the legal basis or to the facts, the basis. Even if the facts basis, they're also very selective. They try to select something which is in favor of their positions or their interests. So they are trying to say that. And I'm very much just appreciate the Professor Schabas' articles, which is a very just show it's a very legal rationality is behind it. As a legal professionals, as either the law professor and the lawyers, how to categorize genocide in terms of the rule of law, rather than in the for the political purpose. So it's just because they have politicalized these issues. So this actually, they look at things with its own positions, its own perspectives, with its own glasses. So they cannot just to categorize, to just look at the whole things just completely or just entirely as a whole, or they do not just try to categorize the behaviors or just in the legal way. So there is a miscategorizations and interpretations of the facts. And as Professor Schabas says, so the intention is very critical to constitute the genocide. For China, so we all know the Chinese people or Chinese government have no any intentions to genocide Uyghurs, just rule. So we also, for the quite long time, for the long history, we just treated the Uyghurs is also one of the ethnic group as the members of our Chinese family, the big families. So we do not just, there's no such intentions. So this is, I think, so the political is, but of course, so I want the questions is why? So why? So during this time, so United States, the Joe Biden, actually now Armenia, so this is a genocide events. Why the Northwest countries use the genocide as a weapon at this moment in current situations? So this is what's the rationalities or the reason behind it? So this may be my questions to the Professor Schabas. So because you now is an expert in this field, and also you are just very much care, just take care of the looking into the whole situations. So this is my questions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Professor Lu, for your comments. I'll try very briefly. I mean, I appreciate your comments, which again, as you know, we're in large agreement on these issues about China, about both the death penalty, where I think on the death penalty, maybe I didn't make the point clearly enough. Of course, I would like very much to see China end the death penalty, and I'm convinced it will do so at some point. Future, but I think it's inevitable. That's all. I think it's one of those social developments that happens for the same reason that we don't whip people in public anymore, and we don't drown people as punishments. There are these barbaric ancient punishments that all countries and all cultures, I think, probably did at previous times in history, and that they've disappeared because time marches on. And we're living in a period where the death penalty, we're watching it disappear. I'm convinced it will disappear in China, whether you and I and Michael and Professor Tim, whether we do anything or whether we do nothing, it will happen anyway. So I'm convinced of that. You know, you ask about the genocide, why now? There are probably, first of all, genocide is a very, it's believed to be a very powerful rhetorical instrument. And we have many examples of it. I've been following this now for 30 years, as I told you. So maybe for people in China, this is new and you're getting interested in it and reading about it. But I've seen these accusations come about genocide, and it creates, as when you have a human rights issue that it's difficult to mobilize public opinion on, because you keep trying and you can't get in the newspapers and you can't get in the television and you can't get in the media, and it's like a tired dish that you keep serving for your meals at home, and one day you say, we need to put some spice on this, and so you reach for the cupboard and there's a little bottle and it says genocide on it. You take some genocide and you sprinkle it on whatever, on the rice, on the omelet, and then you get attention. People say, wow, but it doesn't last for very long. You know, the UN did this with Syria a few years ago. They made an accusation that ISIS in Syria was committing genocide against a small religious ethnic minority called the Yazidi. And they did one report. The UN Commission said, this is an ongoing genocide, but they never wrote about it again. So I don't know why it was ongoing, because they never turned to it again. And I've seen it with other cases, charges of genocide in different countries. It doesn't last for very long. It gives that, because once you've used it, you can't generate the same excitement again. So I would expect this will pass. I think the other thing is that the Uyghur and their allies, the Uyghur nationalists, I don't want to call them terrorists. That's a term I actually don't like using generally, but let's just call them the Uyghur nationalists, some of whom definitely want Xinjiang to secede from China, are very effective in their campaigning. And they're doing a good job at getting people excited about it. They're producing materials and they're very effective in their lobbying. And I think that's probably contributing to it too. And it's hard for a country like China to defend itself in that context. That's, I think, I don't know if I can say much more than that. It's a complicated thing to explain, but you know, there's a lot of hypocrisy with this. You know, the country where I also, Parliament of Canada had a report a few years ago from a commission of inquiry, a government commission, that said that Canada had committed genocide against the indigenous peoples, what we used to call the Indians, the original inhabitants of Canada. And this was a report that was commissioned by the government. And the Prime Minister said he agreed with the report. So he admitted that genocide had been committed in Canada. So I don't know that I don't think they made a very good argument there either. But I had friends in Canada who said, this is great. Now we've recognized genocide. I said, so whom are you going to prosecute now? Who is going to jail for committing genocide? They said, oh, no. It's not about that. It's just a political declaration. I said, well, no, that's not right in law. If you say Canada committed genocide, then the leaders of Canada should go to jail for doing it. I said, no. So a lot of it isn't very serious. It's using it in a rhetorical sense. And all I can say is that China could go back and get on with doing what you do, and eventually it will pass. I think it will pass. And let's keep pointing out the terrible problems in the United States and elsewhere of persecution of minorities and of racial discrimination, because genocide, at the root of it, it's all about racial discrimination. And let's hold every country in the world that engages in racial discrimination, let's not let them get away with it. So that means the United States, it means the United Kingdom, it means France. Let's all do that. You do it in China, and I'll do it where I live.
Thank you, Professor Schabas. I want to take this time to acknowledge that we have Dr. Tan with us. One of your students now is in Suzhou at this moment. She managed to join us now.
Are you done?
谭博士，你的那个话筒好像没开。You are muted, I think, still. Still no sound.
Oh,
Hi,
hello.
Peter.
Yeah, okay, now good.
Yeah.
How are you then?
Hello.
All right.
Yeah, it's Finland, and I'm so happy to see you. Yeah, in this way. Oh, network.
Dr. Tan, do you have any? Yeah, sorry. Do you have any questions or comments at this moment for Professor Schabas?
I joined a bit late,
so
yeah, I
joined
a bit late, so I missed most of the part.
I want to tell you, Dan, I just wrote an article and I cited you. You're in the footnote.
Oh, thank you so much.
What an honor for a student.
I will email you, and I want to also read your article and get some incitement on. Thank you.
And send me a picture of your baby.
Oh, yes. Yes, I will. Yeah, he is still quite a good boy now.
That will change.
Yeah, maybe 2 months later.
Yes, I'm glad Dr. Tan's, Professor Tan's boy can allow us to have some time with you now. I want to check if you have any questions you want to ask or any comments you want to share at this moment. If not, go ahead.
Yeah, I missed most part because I was not here, and I think Schabas has mentioned his idea, and I would just recommend people who are interested in the genocide issue to read his recent article he mentioned on the website, and also his books about the genocide. It was, I think, if you want to know more, you can. It be a starting point for you to know the history and the development, the contextual elements, and also the area, like from a lawyer's aspect, not from only political ideas. So if you are a lawyer, you are students in international law or public international or international criminal law, it's better to do your job in your area. That's my comment.
Thank you, Professor Tan. And Professor Schabas, I want to check with you, like we're already over the time, it's approaching 1.5 hours now. I want to see if you still have time for maybe another 1 or 2 questions, or shall we just close now? Yeah.
Okay. We're here. 5 or 10 more minutes. Okay.
Okay, yeah, so there are many questions on the chat box, but I recognize one name that is also a judge this year. That is Dr. Zhao Lizhi from Beijing Foreign Study University. One of the university produced most of the diplomats, as we say in China, in Beijing. 北京外国语大学的赵礼志老师。赵礼志教授他提了一个问题 Professor Zhao, are you here? Maybe you can put your question directly to Professor Schabas, or I can read it for you if you're not here. Yeah, go ahead, Professor Zhao.
Yeah, good morning, Professor Schabas. It's so nice to meet you here, and yeah, I'm so excited and honored to hear your thank you presentation today. So my question, which I've already put in the box, I've read your paper, I've read your essay in your blog, the Xinjiang genocide allegations are unjustified. Your paper with Professor Sachs. So my question is, I mentioned you wrote that technically genocide can be proven even without evidence that people were killed. So I'm only a bit confused because later on you said that, however, a genocide can hardly be recognized by a court without the proof of intent. So what I'm confused is, you said, but some genocide can be proven. So my question is, does that mean that you agree there might be some historical cases about genocide in human history, which may not be put in front of the justice, however, then can be the truth in history? So that is my question. I'm wondering whether you can get it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, your question about history, of course, there's a time factor with genocide prosecutions, which depend on, we can only prosecute people who are alive. And so we can only really think about prosecuting the crime of genocide taking place over the last 60 or 70 years, not before. But we can use the term to refer to genocidal acts that took place in human history previously. I don't think there's any anything wrong with that. It's also clear the Genocide Convention cannot apply retroactively. It can only apply to events from 1948, but the word itself we can use. To carry confusion about using this term about the genocidal intent, you know, when you read the definition in Article 2 of the Convention, you have acts that do not necessarily involve killing. So you have the second act of genocide, which is causing physical or mental harm to members of the group. So this is not a killing. You have preventing births within the group. This is not killing. And you have transferring children. This is not killing. So it's possible to have genocidal acts that don't involve, that these acts be committed with the intent to destroy the group physically. When you have a genocidal act and you have evidence of intent that is direct. When I say direct, I mean a statement by the perpetrator. If someone says, we intend to destroy that group physically and we're going to prevent births in the group until they disappear, this is genocide. No killing, but it would be genocide. The problem is that in most of the cases where we have allegations of genocide, we don't have any all we have is a national court, a pattern of conduct, what common law lawyers call circumstantial evidence. We have acts, and then we have to infer, we have to deduce, we have to speculate about the intent based on the acts, because we have no direct evidence of the intent. And the National Court has said that when you're basing it on the pattern of facts, a pattern of conduct, without direct evidence, there can only be, that can be the only explanation that you intend to physically destroy the group. If you don't have that, then you cannot say it's genocide. And so this is the requirement. And so it means that in practice, the greater the number of deaths, the more reasonable it is to say that the only conclusion is they meant to destroy the group in whole or in part. With the Armenians, you have 1.5 million deaths. It's not so hard to conclude that they meant for that to happen. The UN report talks about one death of a Uyghur. And they say he died of, the Chinese authorities say he died of pneumonia in the jail, but the family disagree. So this is not evidence of genocidal intent, that's all. So this is the point that I'm making, you know, because sometimes people say, you see, you read that definition, you don't have to kill people to commit genocide. Well, no, you don't, but then you have to have direct evidence of the killing. I've been lecturing on this a lot in the United States. And I give them as an example, a recent trial of Chauvin. I don't know how many people, whether you followed this in China, this is the man who killed George Floyd, Derek Chauvin. Yeah. He had this trial. He was charged with murder, but he was not charged with first-degree murder because they didn't have direct evidence that he planned the killing of George Floyd. Maybe he did. Maybe he did, but we don't have any evidence. And so they don't charge him with that, you know. Is it possible that somewhere in the Chinese authorities that there was a resolution adopted saying, we want to exterminate the Uyghur? It's possible, but we have no evidence of it. Anything's possible, but we have no evidence. Is it the only deduction we can make from the measures that have been taken in that the Chinese government, it was, of course not. Obviously not. That's why the allegation is wrong and frivolous. I hope that answers your questions, Professor Zhao.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Professor Schabas. I think, yeah, we have many questions in the chat box. We wouldn't have time to go into them. Also, the last question asked about the genocide case in ICIIL.
Michael, can I say, I saw,
Sure.
Michael.
Sure.
Can I say, Michael, I saw the chat question very quickly,
Right.
but
Sure.
I can't concentrate on chat and answer questions at the same time. So sorry.
Yeah. I'm saying like, yeah, like we probably don't have time to go into those questions in the chat anyway. So, and also there's one question that is not appropriate anyway, because it's about the case you're representing now in front of the ICJ, which you cannot comment. So maybe if you have questions, you can still ask Dr. Tan. Professor Tan is a student of Professor Schabas, and then she can tell you about Professor Schabas' opinion on those issues. If that's a good solution, we can come later before this. But anyway, so thank you very much, Professor Schabas, for your time. And we really appreciate to have you with us today. And hopefully in the future, we can really have you physically in China to have this dialogue, more intense, more continuous dialogue in Beijing or in Shanghai with us. And with that, I will conclude today's conversation lecture with Professor Schabas. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah.
Professor.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Michael. Bye-bye.